Welcome everyone back to the Mentor Collective. And today I am so excited to introduce someone that I've had the privilege of getting to know over the past few months. We met at a conference, and Dr. Joe Malone has taught me so much about God's design for our bodies and relationships. And some people have told me about my own curriculum. I wish I would have had this when I was younger. And I have to say, Dr. Joe's books are books that I wish I would have had when I was younger. And I know you're going to understand why once he shares today. And Dr. Joe has spent over 30 years studying human sexuality, women's health, relationships, neuroscience, and sexual wellness. He has a Ph.D. in health and human performance and a minor in neuropsychology. And he's taught at the university level for many years while speaking across the country on different topics. So I'm so excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Joe.
Oh, it's my honor and pleasure. Thank you so much, Leighton.
I have both of your books, actually, Battle of the Sexes and Women's Sexual Wellness. And there's so much research in here. I wonder if you can just kind of start by summarizing chapter 1 in this book, which is the human sex differences, so that as we mentor girls, we can help them better understand why men are the way they are and why girls are the way they are. And also, we did have a question in the chat. Do you want to explain what hookup culture is, just in case for those that aren't familiar?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Hookup culture is really having sex with somebody without having any kind of a romantic relationship with them. Literally at parties, places where generally everybody gets really, blackout drunk. Hookup culture is just what I would call sexual anarchy. What I've learned is so important is sexual integrity, but I've also learned why it's difficult in this sexual anarchy situation, this sexual devolution, I call it, instead of revolution, that we've had going since about the time I was, coming of age in the 70s. So the research I've seen recently is that around 50% of women are having sex with somebody that they've known less than 2 weeks. So that's kind of a hookup culture type of a situation. And this is what makes it so difficult because, back when we had the norms of, we cherish sex for marriage. That's the way I put it. When that was the norms and everything worked correctly, again, the women were in control, which is the way it should be. And the men weren't able to play out the way that a lot of their brains work. But because now we're in this situation that we just talked about with hookup culture, it's really difficult. It's really difficult in many ways. So here's why. The brains of young men and young women are very, very different when it comes to sex drive. There's 3 parts in the male brain that are, 2 of them are twice as big as in the female brain, and one of them is quite a bit larger, and I'll just explain why it's different in its function. But 2 of them, the first one, the medial preoptic area, which is over twice as big in the male brain, packed twice as densely with neurons and sensitive to testosterone. And men have 20 times more testosterone on average at that age than women. And so right off the bat, you have a huge difference in sex drive right there. And also, I tell the women on campus, have you ever noticed how the guy that you're with going to the party, when you come into the party, his eyes start kind of, landing on all the attractive females in the room? Well, again, a lot of it has to do with the MPOA, the way it's situated, and what is picked up by him because of that. Second area in the sex drive part of the brain, the hypothalamus, that is twice as big in men, is an INAH3. Third interstitial nucleus of the hypothalamus. And it is twice as packed with neurons. It's also sensitive to testosterone, which again, men have 20 times more. The third sex drive part of the brain that is bigger in men, but not twice as big as in women, is called the ventromedial hypothalamus. And in men, it is very closely related to aggression, and that can be physical aggression, it can be sexual aggression. In women, it's more attuned and more, its purpose is more nurturing. And so again, you have a big difference in both the size of the sex drive parts of the brain and also the chemistry of the sex drive part of the brain. In addition to that, women in their bodies and especially their brains have 13 times more what we call SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, and that that negates the effects of either testosterone or estrogen. And so you add in another element of why men have so much more sex drive than women. You mentioned alcohol earlier, Layden. Alcohol only exacerbates this situation, because what it does is it makes both sexes, their testosterone rises a little bit, but when women who aren't used to having their testosterone rise, it usually causes a big difference in their behavior, and it does, especially if they happen to be in their fertile window. And fertile window is that if day 1 is the start of your period and day 5 is typically the end of your period, then it would be about day 8 or 9 or 10 when this fertile window would start. And for the next 4 or 5 days, when the only time in the month when you're actually fertile, they're actually, the increase of the amount of estrogen in a woman's system is 200 times during that time period, in that 4 or 5 days, 5 or 6 days that she can get pregnant. So you combine alcohol with that, and in that time period, which raises her testosterone, and that's where you see a lot of atypical female sex drive relationship. So there's one part in the female human brain that's bigger than the male brain that has to do with sex drive, and that is the anterior cingulate cortex. Anterior cingulate cortex, and it is the area of sexual anxiety. So it's the area in the brain that tells us if there's a sexual situation developing, that maybe it's not such a great idea, to go on with this. So it's larger in the female brain. So you can see that, God designed females to be the ones that are more sensible when it came to sex. And going to the Bible, we all know how important John 3:16 is, for God so loved the world, etc. In Genesis 3:16, it talks about to Eve, who represents womankind. He says to her, your desire will be for your husband. And you'll notice that he never said that to Adam. He never said that your desire will be for your wife, just to her. And so that's really, I think, the basis of why our species is really a monandrous species. Monogamy, yes, but we're monogamous because our women are generally monandrous. And what, again, in Greek, that means, mon means one, andro means male in Greek. We have one man, women, basically. That's the tendency in about 80%, 80 to probably 90% of our women. So, and again, it's big difference in sex drive. About 3 times. Men have about 3 times the sex drive of women on average. Women have, on the other hand, 3 times the bonding drive of men. And so again, I always, when I tell the college crowds, I've got women, and so usually I sit them, in different parts of the room, women over here, men over here, so I can talk about one to the other. But I tell them, who's supposed to win this argument between bonding and sex? Bonding, because you got what they want, ladies. So. And again, the reason that's so important, and here's maybe the most important thing I'm going to talk about tonight. The men's sex drive is such a overt thing that there's even this effect. The Coolidge effect, unfortunately, because of the way our males and other species males are chemistried and anatomied, is kind of a fact of life. And that's what makes hookup culture so intractable and hard to do something about, is because it's very similar with these guys, these young men, to a cocaine addiction, because that's basically what it does. It just really spikes their testosterone, dopamine, and eventually their opioids, because the opioids are the reward chemical, once the sexual completion is met.
By the way, I remember one of the statistics in your book talked about how girls, I think it was like over 70 or 80% of girls regret hooking up
78.
afterwards. Yeah. Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, because girls are not they're not designed for that. Again, I mentioned that maybe 85 to 90% are not aligned. That doesn't align with their design. And again, I believe all these things are God created, and they go along with what the Bible says, because the Bible talks about do not, commit fornication, do not commit adultery. And by the way, fornication is, I got this written down here. Let's see. Fornication is mentioned 67 times in the Bible, and adultery is only mentioned 58. Because again, what I've come to in my research is that fornication or premarital sex, however you want to express it, really is the fuel for adultery in a lot of cases later, because the male and the young man and young woman don't bond correctly. And so and I'll tell you why in just a minute here. But if you can see what I'm saying, the ingredients are there to disrupt this God system readily if we don't go by his design, so to speak. So men's brains are different in this way. They fall in love differently. And this is something that's so hard for women and girls these days to figure out. I've been blessed to work with some at-risk young women here in our area, and I give them a pretest on, to see where they're thinking. The first question on the pretest is, what makes a man fall in love with you? And on the pretest, almost all of them said sex. That's their impression, is sex is what makes a man fall in love. In other words, they got to offer themselves to the young man in order to have a chance at a long-term relationship. What I try to teach them in the hour that I have them, kind of an intervention hour, is exactly the opposite from what the truth is. All right. And that's, again, I think society-wide, the urban myth has been going around for 50 years now, is that you got to have sex with guys or else you'd have a chance with them. And again, Jennifer will if you don't. So here's the key thing for you all to take with you, probably from everything we talked about today. Men's brains require romance to fall in love. Now, here's what I mean by that. If he's allowed to, have ready access to sexual completion, within months and months and months, actually, of these two getting to know each other and being attracted to each other, and all of that, then this important bonding hormone in his brain called vasopressin. Some people pronounce it vasopressin, but vasopressin is the correct pronunciation. Vasopressin is the male main bonding chemical. It has to be present in his brain for a certain amount of time, and we're talking about months and months and months, in order to create receptors. A brain receptor looks like that. It looks like a C, except it's about 1,000,000 times smaller than my fingers there. Okay, so it takes a long time for him and she to be in a courtship situation. I call it chaste dates, but they have to be in this, again, old school courtship thing. It doesn't really matter what they do, as far as like going on, dates to dinner or movies or just being around each other, whatever. They're attracted to each other. There's a sexual tension there, and that's building that vasopressin up in his brain, and it's gonna be in his brain as long as he doesn't have sexual completion with her. Okay. But if it happens, like in a hookup situation, second date or whatever, there's a property to the vasopressin that in that chemical explosion that happens when he reaches sexual completion, and it could be, we don't know exactly what it is, but it could be the serotonin that explodes. It could be the prolactin that explodes. It could be very likely the opioids that explode in his brain. But something blows that vasopressin out of his brain, and it goes back to baseline vasopressin. And so he doesn't bond. He doesn't, what we call, fall in love. Okay. But whether or not sex happens or the courtship that I'm describing, the chaste dates happen, the problem is he needs vasopressin, he needs testosterone, and he needs dopamine in order to bond. And he needs it in there for a long time. He needs to have the vasopressin, especially, in there long term, months and months and months. She, on the other hand, all she needs is dopamine and oxytocin. And she gets a lot of that from either a chaste date situation, a courtship situation, or a hookup or sex. And so classically, and this is what I was seeing with my MTSU women in class, and this is why they were all torn up, anxious, depressed, and cutting themselves, is that they were falling in love because, again, the sex was getting them, making them fall in love, but it wasn't making him fall in love. Okay. And that's across society. That's what's happening, is this: women don't realize that if they insist on chaste dates and they insist on what I would call a Christian courtship, then those vasopressin receptors are going to be built up eventually, because vasopressin is going to be in his brain because he's not having sexual release with her, and so he's not getting it negated by that, and then this vasopressin molecules start locking in millions in the brain. And when that happens, his testosterone drops a little bit, and when that happens, his secondary bonding hormone, which is your primary, ladies, bonding hormone, oxytocin, also locks. And so the men's bonding process, or the men's falling in love process, is more difficult and more complex than the women's, but it's stronger even once it happens. And so because we have society the way it is, where there's so much sexual anarchy, so much premarital sex going on, we've got a lot of bad bonding going on, and if these couples do get married, in a lot of cases, the male is not bonded properly to the female. Another way to put it, he hasn't fallen in love with her, okay, in reality. So again, God's word of thou shalt not commit fornication, and again he says 67 times, but thou shalt not commit fornication, and only 50 let's see,
57 was it?
Yeah. So about 10 more times he talks about fornication than he does adultery. In today's society, and I've got the stats right here, in 1972, again, when I was just coming up, when I was coming of age, only 26% of Americans believe that premarital sex was acceptable. So 26% back in 72. And what percent now thinks that premarital sex is acceptable? Any guesses?
I'm going to say 72 is what I was going to say.
You're very close. 73.
Wow.
Okay, so
That's
but at the same time, extramarital sex, or cheating, we would call it, or adultery, only 7.5 presently percent think that it's acceptable. And 72, Layden, to your number, 72% do not think it's acceptable in today's world. So again, we've got this, we've got premarital sex. It's like there's nothing, nothing there. People think, oh, there's nothing to it. Everybody has premarital sex. Everybody lives together before they get married. There's a whole thing where you got to try out the car and all that. But actually, what's happening here, and people don't realize it, is that young people are messing themselves up by living the hookup culture. And again, what the Bible says is being shown to be scientifically accurate, and medically accurate, ethically obviously accurate, but it's right on as far as what's going to allow us to have a flourishing life. So young men, and this is something you can use as ammunition in dealing with in mentoring these young women. Young women don't realize that young men categorize, and men in general categorize. Now again, not all men. The ones that have been raised in the church, and raised in the church and have lower testosterone, they found are very, in a lot of cases, not this way. And also the most intelligent, the top 20% of intelligent men generally want to have an exclusive relationship, but that leaves you with 80% that don't. So in general, they categorize women, and if a woman is willing to readily be sexual with them, then they get put into the for a good time only bin. If a woman isn't readily willing to have sex with you, then they get into the bin of possible marriage partner. Okay, again, that's where most of the young women I've ever dealt with, they want to be in the marriage part of it. The other thing is after an unmarried sexual episode, and especially if the young man has experienced sexual completion, within 10 seconds he's seeing her as less attractive, less funny, less intelligent, etc., because he has not bonded. Within 10 seconds she's seeing him as more attractive, funnier, and just all the good stuff. Okay, so again, you see how it's really a crazy paradox that's going on with, again, all the guardrails taken off of our relationships the way they used to be. Pre probably 65 and back, we had guardrails that allowed our society to function where we only having 5% of our children being born out of wedlock. So now we're approaching 50% being born out of wedlock. When they asked young men they gave them 67 characteristics about a woman they wanted to marry, what the top ones were. The top two out of 67 they had to choose from were sexual loyalty. Well, actually, sexual integrity, number one. Number two was sexual loyalty to them. They want to know that this woman, if they're getting to the point where they're seeing her as their life partner, their marriage partner, they want to know that they can trust her completely. Again, our lives are so dependent on trust. And vasopressin is dependent on trust. That's why his main hormone is, works the way it does, because there shouldn't be any. If a woman, I ask these girls this: if you're having sex with a guy, what's that telling you about you? Probably, if you're having sex with me, you've probably had sex with other guys. What if you're not having sex with him? That's telling him that if you're not willing to have sex with me, you're probably not having sex with anybody else. So you start establishing your trust and your credibility. Finally, on this topic, the shorter the time to sex in a relationship, the shorter the relationship. I'll say it again. The sooner you have sex in your relationship, knowing this person, the sooner it's going to be over with. That's what the research shows. Okay. So again, my experience with women is that they don't want, and I would call those testosterone-based relationships. They don't want shallow, superficial, and short relationships. They want oxytocin and vasopressin-based relationships. They want deep, intimate, and long relationships. That's what they're looking for. But they're shooting themselves in the foot by playing ball, so to speak, sexually. Again, the women have the control. They are the controlling factor in the whole thing, and they have more to lose. And again, they're designed that way. Again, I go all the way back to the Bible, but scientifically, you can show this as well with not just our species, but across species. Females impose restrictions on males for, in allowing them access to sex. They have to do certain things. They have to live up to certain, tasks that females are requiring of them. It's called female choice. That's how they make their choices. So they don't just give sex away in these other species. So God, in my view, my scientific view, God has made us fearfully and wonderfully for the purpose that we carry out, on this earth. And really, when you look at what these people that are trying to sexualize us and sexualize our young people are doing, they're trying to make us like apes. They're trying to make us like chimps. And again, that isn't a prosperous road. It isn't a profitable road for us. We're not designed for that. So bottom line, the way it's designed in the Bible is exactly the way, that we should be living. The Bible is really a human operating system, a human operating system manual, basically. So it has all the right answers for us.
There's so much packed into Dr. Joe's book. So he has this one called Battle of the Sexes, and then he also has another book that I recently bought called The Women's Sexual Wellness. And both of these are on his website, drjoemalone.com. We're actually working on a book together to make this digestible for girls and young women, to make it kind of like a devotional style, to marry the research and the science with the word and scripture and what God says and how we are designed. Because honestly, I have not found a resource out there like that. There's a lot of books on purity, but girls are always asking, but why? Why is it that I'm supposed to wait till marriage? And I think that's a really honest, important question to ask. And God has the answers for us. And a lot of it is in science. And so I just think it's so fascinating how science backs the Bible, like you said. And it's so incredible to see how much God has weaved into the design of our bodies, his greater purposes. And it's really quite beautiful. And Dr. Joe's done such an incredible job of sharing that message and teaching it in his books. And we will keep you all in the loop on when we get closer to launching our book, because I think it's going to be a great resource for young women. And Dr. Joe, we just appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for being with us.